Now, what's going on here? Your book talks about activation. This is a really fascinating sort of bit of data that speaks to precisely the point that I was just making, that lobbyists are going to be tending more likely to approach upper middle class and people like that to support their endeavors. This makes sense. We've just argued, because political groups are going to look out to recruit and enjoin the people who are most likely going to want to participate. So what this graph asks is the percentage of Americans who have been asked to be active in politics, and you can see here that the information is broken down in terms of economic quintile, which means that we have the lowest 20% here being the poorest Americans, and you can see the poor Americans are not asked very often to be involved in politics, whereas if we go to the other extreme, the highest quintile is asked very often to participate. And I think that's a really fascinating observation. 80% of the wealthiest Americans have been asked to be politically active by lobbyists, by sophisticated organizations that seek to recruit people with money and economic clout and energy and self-belief to get organized and try to write to government, write to politicians to affect political change. So clearly there's a class bias here, no doubt about it. Now, as we move on, we have to talk about the different types of strategies that lobbyists use. Following the book's dichotomy, we can distinguish between the insider strategy, what we normally think of as interest group politics, in fact, and those are, the stereotypical face-to-face meetings in which the lobbyist tries to persuade the decision maker that the interest group's position makes sense. The decision maker may not always be aware that it makes sense, so he needs to be persuaded, or she needs to be persuaded, and this is what happens. The successful lobbyist is going to be very sensitive to a kind of an informal rules of the game, how the game is played in Washington, and of course the fact that really to get that influence, to get the influence, to be an effective lobbyist, to have something you can sell to a client who wants to gain influence in DC, like Jack Abramoff did, you're going to have a kind of a network, what people sometimes call the old boy network, right? That is, maybe you hung out with politicians in school, or maybe you are yourself a former politician. Former politicians, this is the concept of the revolving door, love to become lobbyists after they've been congressmen, after they've been politicians. Why? Actually, because sometimes they're promised jobs in exchange for helping to smoothen out the legislative agenda for the lobby group. And also, ultimately, they're going to make a lot more money as a lobbyist than they are as a politician. You might not think this, but American politicians aren't paid particularly well. And so they do have an incentive, if they want to be wealthy, to consider very seriously offers of jobs from lobbyists. As democratic citizens, however, we have to be worried about that, because it means that our politicians are going to be thinking kind of maybe with two frames of reference in their head, representing the interests of their constituents on the one hand, and thinking about that nice little cushiony job on the other side of their tenure as a congressman in Washington, D.C. So that's the insider strategy, right? It involves old boy networks operating behind closed doors, and it involves being able to put pressure both on the executive branch and on Congress through these kinds of expert developed forms of knowledge. Now, as we were saying, the insider strategy takes place largely behind closed doors, and it's largely taking place in these old boy networks. And the Abramov scandal, which we've been talking about, I think reveals very clearly that what the lobbyists do is very much about the personal connections. And the point here really is that it's all about access, okay? I mean, the lobbyist, his job, if he's doing it right, he's a middleman bridging these groups, these industrial groups, for example, and the politicians themselves, who are the ones, after all, who have been elected, who are going to vote on the legislation and write the legislation or attack the legislation in Congress, depending on the context. So the lobbyists are in the middle, and they have a lot of money from their clients, and to make the job as easy as possible for the politician to sort of go along with the will and interests of the vested parties, the lobbyists will even go to the lengths of writing legislation for the congressmen. Sometimes congressmen are very busy people, and their staffs are very busy, and they don't always have time to write legislation. So lobbyists are only too happy to do it. One really big example of this in recent times has been ALEC, the American the American Legislative Exchange Council, which actually has recently gotten into trouble because of the fact that it is perpetuating campaigns that deny the existence of global warming and poo-poo the need for legislation to do anything about global warming. Recently, after the environmental marches in September 2014, Google and other companies have withdrawn their funding from ALEC because Google, Facebook have decided to get on board with the global warming agenda and the anti-global warming agenda, and to stop funding this kind of counter information that's been circulated by the coal industry and other energy industries that have a vested interest in preventing change to do anything about global warming. The outsider strategy, by contrast, relies on a different kind of approach. Instead of focusing on things and points of pressure in the institutions inside Washington, D.C., it tries to focus pressure outside of D.C. It tries to go out into the countryside, for example, and as we used earlier on about the sort of war on coal idea that's being perpetuated right now. We have here in the Billboard example, Obama's no job zone, right? The president talking about creating jobs, but his EPA, that is his Environmental Protection Association or agency, is destroying jobs, and that we should stand up for coal jobs. And we have here facesofcoal.org, as if that was not a corporate interest, but a public interest group of some sort that was advertising this. However, if we look at who funds this group, we see very, very clearly that it is industry and vested interests against environmental movement, for example, who are promoting the money that puts out this message. So that's not to say, though, that the outsider strategy isn't effective, right? Because it creates a base of voters maybe outside of DC, elsewhere in the country, who are maybe only too happy to write letters and to organize themselves into effective letter writing campaigns, petition signing campaigns, to get messages on the desks of the congressmen. And so together, the insider and outsider strategies are often coordinated with each other, and very effectively so. Um, so that's pretty interesting. The insider strategy and the outsider strategy working together. Now, on this slide, I want to talk about the rise of what we call the public interest group, the sort of the private interest group, which is largely what lobbyists work for, is one thing. We've talked already about the businesses and the business interest groups, and ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. Here we're talking about public interest groups. Now, public interest groups try to focus in on what we call, and this is the most important thing you're going to need to know about this, the collective action problem. The collective action problem is a basic problem for most societies, in fact. The idea is that everyone in a group benefits regardless of his or her contribution to a collective action. Once there is an effort, for example, to clean up a river, even if I didn't do much to clean up the river myself, I benefit from having a clean river. And so my specific individual contribution may not have made that much of a difference. And so in this sense, these grand social sort of accomplishments may have associated with them what we call free riders. That is to say, people who've gone along only too happy to enjoy the benefits of the collective good without contributing to its provision. Clean water, clean air, all of these are examples of collective goods, and a street that has all the trash picked up on it. I'm only too happy to go along with that. But I didn't pay for it. I didn't contribute for it. I didn't sort of make any special effort to help facilitate the availability and condition of this public good. So this is what we call sometimes the tragedy of the commons, okay? That not everyone is going to equally contribute to doing the right thing. And a public interest group can be defined in this context as any group seeking government action that will not principally benefit members of the group. In other words, it's a group that goes against the tragedy of the commons. It's a group that's not necessarily looking to serve itself, but a group that, at least in its own head anyway, exists to serve the greater social principle. So special interest groups seek benefits for their members, right? This is the special interest groups are what we've been talking about all the lectures so far: the oil companies, the business lobby groups. A steel producers lobby, for example, is going to seek a limit on imported steel to shut out foreign competition. We've seen that happen towards the middle of the Bush Junior White House. But a public interest group, on the other hand, which is what we're talking about here, seeks policies that, at least in the minds of the members, will benefit society as a whole. And one great example of this is Bill McKibben's 350.org. And you can see the big 350 on the screen here, taken from a photograph where people were protesting in abandoned docklands recently. But 350.org is an organization set up by Bill McKibben. He's an environmentalist and an expert in global warming, and it refers to the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere that we can have before we have gone beyond the Copenhagen Summit settled criteria for limiting global warming to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, public interest groups are very numerous and diverse. Your textbook discusses Ralph Nader and his efforts in the 60s and 70s actually Ralph Nader more 70s and 80s, but to combat defective products being flogged off on consumers, and he started a consumers lobby group, which was designed to benefit a public interest, and that is safety in our cars and safety in our other consumable goods. And he was very successful in achieving that goal. They, just like with the outside strategy, appealed to citizens outside Washington to put pressure on Congress. They realized they wouldn't be very strong appealing directly to the congressmen themselves because they didn't have the money to do it. And so besides the car industry and the oil industry have those guys pretty much all sewed up, right? So instead they went to the masses. They went outside Washington to get the masses to write letters and to campaign, put pressure on Congress and the executive branch to address their issues. So there you go. We have that insider strategy, which is very, very effective, as we know. But we also have an outsider strategy, which can be pursued both by lobbyists working on behalf of vested interests and lobbyists working on the part of public interests. And both are equally active, as we've seen from the examples that we've discussed. Now, the book makes a point to mention the counter-mobilization that elite groups in the country are using, and we've been discussing these a little bit already, but just to sort of formalize some of the language in the book, I guess the point is that although the outsider strategy employed by citizens, public interest groups, can be helpful and has been helpful in democratizing and showing the democratic potential for the pressure group system, the lobby group system that we've been discussing today, it's needs to be kept in mind that elites can use these means for their own self-interests as well, and have been effective in figuring out how to do this. And the message that they've been perpetuating is that it's important to free business from regulatory and tax burdens for the benefit of all Americans. Obviously these moves would benefit their private interests as corporations, but they've been very successful in showing that it's not just their private interests that benefit; it's the the interests of all Americans that benefit. It's sometimes, if you look at, for example, the speeches of Mitt Romney in his campaign against Barack Obama, you see this language very, very clearly. That you gotta cut taxes on the job creators, he argued, right? Cut taxes on those wealthy entrepreneurs so that they feel more encouraged, or rather less discouraged, from setting up businesses here in the United States of America, for example. So what does that mean? That means that the outsider strategy is clearly not just used by public interest groups. Elites use it too, and we can see all kinds of different methods that they can bring to bear on that, right? If the elites are going to assert their power, they have money to make that happen, and they can use different techniques like direct marketing, for example. Excuse me. The direct marketing in this instance refers to the targeted solicitation of individuals for political support by phone, or sometimes by mail, or by email even. The advantage of direct marketing, of course, is that much more than radio or television, The political appeal is adaptable, right? You can use data to figure out specialized audiences. We were talking about Mad Men a moment ago. This was the innovation that marketing firms developed in the 50s and 60s to sort of try to figure out as much as possible about the nature of the audience, and to figure out, instead of obviously the idea is being like, you could buy advertising on the evening news that everyone's going to see, but maybe you don't need to reach everyone. It might be cheaper for you to just reach 5% of those people, and those 5% of those people are going to be much more effective and useful to you than 90% of the people that are available to you at that time. So specialized direct marketing is very, very important here. And in that vein, then, we can see that corporations now have the ability to reach out to specific sectors of people and encourage them to become politically active, to help them become politically active. And this is the risk, of course, and this is what leads us to what some people call astroturf lobbying, which is the emergence of fake grassroots movement. A grassroots movement, if you're not familiar with the term, well, what is a grassroots? Think about it for a second, right? It means the roots of grass, okay, as opposed to the top of the grass, right? The grass's roots means basically bottom-up politics. And this is a criticism that's really been heavily leveled at the Tea Party, for example, right now, because the Tea Party, while it is composed of people who are genuinely, no doubt, upset with Obama and some of his decisions, the fact is that the Tea Party has not been organized by and large by the people involved. It's been organized largely by those in positions of power. So fake grassroots movements then uses the appearance of a popular democratic momentum to try to persuade elites on Capitol Hill that there's political willpower to support their agendas. There is a whole panoply of public relations firms in Washington, D.C. That will pretty much for the right amount of money, they will go out there for you, and they will generate you a grassroots movement. And for either side, Democratic or Republican, on just about any issue you like. Lloyd Bentsen, a longtime Democratic senator from Texas, is cited in your textbook as being the person who invented the term astroturf lobbying to describe precisely these artificial grassroots campaigns created by public relations firms. And a major example of this has to be the Tea Party. The Tea Party received major funding from the billionaire Koch brothers and also from the large tobacco companies. And is that to say that the rank and file members of the Tea Party are not legitimately feeling the need to protest? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not trying to disparage the authenticity of people who genuinely and heartfeltly feel like they are part of the Tea Party. It's simply to say that the large corporate interests see their message as being see the message of the Tea Party as one that suits their own legislative goals in the long run. And you might say that's fine, but, not every group has corporate sponsors, right? And that's the difference then between the Tea Party and, say, something like Occupy Wall Street, which was not corporate sponsored and didn't have a lot of money to back it up, right? How easy was it for them to have their voices heard? If they can't be heard, if the voices that are corporate sponsorship get heard, but other voices don't get heard, then what does that say about American democracy? So increasingly, then, these think tanks and these public relations firms are very relevant to our process. They push private interests, they push private agendas. And they often even start nowadays to play a role in evaluating programs and writing legislation itself, as we've argued. So with that, we reached the end of our lecture. Another slightly short one this week, I think, but I do have a video I want you guys to watch. The link is right here. I will post the link for you on our course Blackboard site, and I just want to get you guys to watch as part of this class, if you can, this clip that's available for you with this link, which describes in more detail the activities of Jack Abramov. The interviewer is a U.S. veteran political correspondent by the name of Bill Moyers. I think you will really enjoy the interview. There's a number of documentaries, and there's even a movie about Jack Abramov starring Kevin Spacey. I could have showed you guys clips from those, but I think that Moyers just has this sort of like better approach. I think he's more balanced, and I think he's more interested in getting to the bottom of the story and less interested in sort of the salacious detail. So scandal is scandal, right? But there's ways of talking about it that have more integrity, I think, than others. So that's it for today, guys. I will talk to you soon. See you in class, and I hope you enjoy the clip. Remember to look for this link in the message that I'm sending out to you on our Blackboard today. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.